Selecting the proper microphone is crucial in recording. It is fundamental to know how to choose the right microphone and where to place it. Each mic has certain characteristics and qualities which great engineers understand and know how to manipulate. A microphone is a transducer. A transducer is a tool used to convert one form of energy to another. In this case, a microphone or transducer changes acoustical energy or sound waves into an electrical current. On the flip side, a speaker is a transducer that takes the electrical energy and converts it into acoustical energy. We categorize microphones as how they pick up the sound source and convert it into electrical energy. They will fall into three separate categories: ribbon microphones, condenser microphones, and dynamic microphones. First, dynamic microphones are one of the two types of microphones, along with ribbon mics, that work on the principle of electromagnetism. Dynamic microphones will be your most common microphone. They essentially function on the reverse principle that a loudspeaker works. Inside the diaphragm, there's a stationary magnet with a coil wrapped around the magnet inside the magnetic field. When sound waves enter the diaphragm, the waves cause the coil to vibrate, disturbing the magnetic field. The sound waves are now converted into electrical energy and move through the cable into a source that either converts the energy into digital binary code or through a speaker. Dynamic microphones are probably the most common, especially in the live setting. Due to the specifications associated with these microphones, they don't require external power, can handle a very high SPL or sound pressure level. They have low handling noise and good rejection. The second microphone, operated with electromagnetic induction, is the ribbon microphone. Essentially operating with the same principle as a moving coil dynamic microphone, but instead of the coil wrapped around a magnet, we have a thin piece of aluminum between two magnetically charged poles. The acoustical disturbance between the poles is what generates a small current. Ribbon microphones are most commonly being used in the early 1930s in broadcasting due to RCA's mass production. Because of the design, the microphone has a bi-directional pickup pattern, or it picks up evenly from both sides. We will go over pickup patterns soon. The pickup pattern deems it unsuitable for most common live situations, as it will pick up the stage sound equally to the sound source and risk feedback from the PA. They work wonders in the studio, however, giving a rich three-dimensional and less direct sound. The frequency response also tends to taper off sooner, around 10 to 12K. This is also why older recordings, where ribbon mics were the norm, tend to sound a bit duller, but using ribbon microphones on the proper source may open up the top end in a mix for other sources. Finally, we have condenser microphones. Most commonly, you will see large and small diaphragm condenser microphones in respect to the size of the capsule. According to specs, a small diaphragm can handle louder SPLs and maintain a more constant pickup pattern at varying decibels and frequency ranges, but still typically doesn't handle sources as loud as dynamic mics. Large diaphragm condensers are used because of the character added, especially on voices and solo instruments. When small diaphragms are used to capture natural sound, large diaphragms add presence and a larger-than-life sound when the right mic is paired with the proper source. Typical application for large diaphragm condensers would be a vocal recording, while you would see small diaphragm condensers as drum overheads, for example. Inside the diaphragm, the microphone contains a small capacitor comprised of even smaller plates inside. These plates are charged with what's known as plus 48 volt phantom power. You'll find a phantom power switch on preamps. If not, a separate 48 volt phantom power box is needed. The plates vibrate against each other, creating an electrical current, which again is processed and transformed back into sound waves when it reaches the speaker system. Because of the electrical charge, condenser mics tend to be more sensitive to timbral nuances, while more definition in the top end and quicker response to transients. They also output much more gain with low signal-to-noise ratio. There are other condenser microphone designs beyond the typical large and small diaphragm, originally for applications other than music production, but have found their way to stages and studios alike. We will briefly look at them and common uses. The first one is called a boundary microphone. This flat design encloses a capsule flush with its surface. More often than not, you will see them in the center of a conference room table, the floors of a stage at a play, and they're even used in sports to mic up hockey boards, basketball floors, and racetracks. I bet you never asked yourself why you can hear ice skates so well when watching ESPN. Musically, you will see boundary microphones most often inside a kick drum or inside a piano. It captures an even ambient sound. Next, we have shotgun mics. Mostly seen on film sets and carried by the boom operator, shotgun microphones have a super tight cardioid pickup pattern, quite directional, but is slotted to allow ambient noise in from other directions, giving the on-axis or wanted sound a distinct sonic footprint differing from the off-axis or unwanted sound. Again, you'll see this a lot with film crews and interviews, but some engineers have incorporated these and making amazing audience microphones in live recordings. In the latter, a shotgun microphone will capture a crowd roaring and excitement off-axis while maintaining an ambient mix from the PA. Lastly, we have lavalier microphones. Lavalier mics, developed for speaking, theater, and film, are tiny personal microphones, typically clipped to the subject's clothing and can be hidden from plain view. While less common in musical applications for voice, we do sometimes see performers with headsets. More so, a clip-on microphone is a tiny lav-style microphone used to clip onto acoustic instruments, wind instruments, inside pianos, on drum sets, and most anything else. Now, knowing what tools you have available is an engineer's greatest asset and propels musicians. A quick story of a great but very uncommon use of lav mics. A colleague and friend of mine spent a number of years on the road with Barry Manilow in the early 80s. The percussion setup was quite large but didn't play an integral part of the show. They could have spent extra time each day running 12 plus microphones to the percussion world, which would result in numerous open microphones and unwanted ambient noise into the front of house mix. In those days too, space was limited, as it was all analog boards, so if you wanted extra channels, the tour would have to bring a sidecar with extra power supplies. The solution they used was putting a lav mic on either shoulder of the percussionist, so whatever the percussionist was playing, they got a stereo feed of what the musician was hearing. The polar pattern, or pickup pattern of a microphone, represents how sensitive the microphone is to sound waves around its axis. The pattern on a single microphone may have slight variations with different frequency ranges and different sound pressure levels, and will always come with a spec sheet to specify this. Some condenser microphones may have switches to change the capsule's pickup patterns. Areas around the microphone that pick up no to very little sound is known as points of rejection. It is important to familiarize yourself with these different patterns and understand how they affect the sound source. The cardioid pattern was given its name due to a sort of heart-shaped pickup pattern. This polar pattern is the most common unidirectional found on many condenser and dynamic microphones alike. The pattern is fairly directed at the sound source, thus positioning is important. This makes cardioid mics a good choice for miking a close and directed sound source. Cardioid mics have good rejection at the rear, so it will pick up minimal amounts of bleed from sound sources directed at the rear of the microphone. Bi-directional patterns are also called figure eights due to the shape of its sensitivity graph. They have an equal sensitivity response in the back as they do in the front. All ribbon microphones, for example, have a figure eight pattern, and some condenser microphones do as well. This pattern is used quite often for room miking, while cardioid patterns are a great directional pattern with rejection behind the mic. The figure eight pattern has good rejection, about 90 degrees off axis on either side. Due to equal sensitivity from the front and back, it is not considered directional and is used when surrounding sounds are desirable. Omnidirectional microphones actually have no specific direction at all. Instead, sound is picked up in a sphere around the microphone. Unless used for live recording or supplementing an in-ear monitor mix, They're pretty much exclusive to the studio environment. This pattern is found in some condenser microphones, lavaliers, and on measurement microphones in acoustic testing. Lastly, we come to super and hypercardioid. These two polar patterns have very similar characteristics, with supercardioid being a more extreme version of hypercardioid. The core of the frequency response in front is cardioid, however, there is a distinct sensitivity in the back. Hypercardioid and supercardioid tend to be a little bit more sensitive to ambient noise in the rear because of that, but has much more ejection on its sides at various degrees. The front of this microphone tends to be much more directional, thus placement is important.